I'm Karen McKim with Wisconsin Election Integrity, and that's a nonpartisan, nonprofit citizens group dedicated to trying to make sure Wisconsin elections reflect the will of the people. And I was asked to put together a voting rights track of workshops for this conference today. So I had to name for myself the 3 top things that we need to publicize and get out there in terms of protecting our elections. And one of those 3 top things is the League of Women Voters Election Observer Program. I've been an observer for, I don't know, a bunch of years. And I can tell you it's a very well-run program. One thing I like about it is they actually issue reports after.
Yeah.
So many things you get involved in and you never see the report at the end of it. But anyway, Wisconsin has wonderful transparency laws for our elections. There's opportunities to observe all sorts of things, but those transparency laws just don't mean a thing unless we actually do have people there to observe. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eileen Newcomer, who's organizer of the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin Observation Program, and I'll pass out these brochures and take it away, Eileen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I'm Eileen. I'm the voter education coordinator for the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. And one of the things that I do as voter education coordinator, like Karen said, is run our election observation program. Before I get into deep with our program, I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of what the League of Women Voters is and we know what we stand for. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization of women and men who committed to making voting free, fair, and accessible to all. We've been around for almost 100 years, about to celebrate our centennial next year, and we formed out of the women's suffrage movement. The League was created to help newly enfranchised women make use of their right to vote and their responsibilities as voters. Over the years, our mission has expanded to empower all voters and defend democracy. We do this by educating voters about elections and then also advocating on the issues. We know democracy works better when everybody is involved and that when our representatives reflect the people and are responsive to the people. And I just want to make sure it's known that the League is staunchly nonpartisan, meaning we don't support or oppose any candidates. As a grassroots organization, we're built from the ground up, and we rely very heavily on all the volunteers we have across the state. We've got 20 local leagues here in Wisconsin. Okay. So these are the things that I'm going to cover today. I'm going to give a brief introduction to what election observation is. I'm going to talk about our program at the League, give kind of like a real behind the scenes look at it, highlight some of the results from our reports, which we publish and are publicly available on our website, and then I'll have some time for Q&A. Okay, so what is an election observer? I know that we have some election observers here. Are you all election observers? Have you? Some people maybe know, don't know? Okay, great. Got a mixed group here. Yeah, so simply put, an election observer is an individual that goes and they monitor the electoral process. Individuals, they can be part of the group, a group that goes out and observes, like League observers. They can be connected to political parties, connected to candidates, and sometimes government agencies send out observers as well. The Elections Commission, they have their audit process, they go and do accessibility audits, and that's kind of election observation as well. So now that we know what observers are, why would you want to observe? What's the purpose of observing? And so the ability, like Karen said, for the public to observe is a key part of election integrity. We have this great transparent process, but if we don't go out and observe, we're not really engaging in it, and there's not that check that the public can provide on elections in the process. For the League, our answer to why observe is because it provides us a unique opportunity to observe the election process firsthand and ensure all eligible voters can exercise their right to vote and to gather information about what's working and what's not so we can try and work to improve the process. We want to monitor and document how laws and election procedures are administered across the state and how they affect voters. Wisconsin is really unique, and we have over 1,800 municipal clerks that run elections on the local level. So there's a lot of different people, different hands involved, and they all have varying levels of experience, varying budgets for training of themselves and for the poll workers and chief inspectors, and varying time to even prepare to get all these things together to make elections run. With so many people working together to put on elections, there is room for a lot of variation, and there's a lot of room for confusion from poll workers and from voters as well, how the process works. We strive to try and alleviate some of this confusion and protect the right to vote through our program. Okay, so what are the rules to be an observer? This is a information piece that's put out by the Wisconsin Elections Commission that has the rules, what you need to follow to be an election observer. Anyone can do it. It's easy, but you really do need to follow the rules. The basics are, when you go to the polling site, check in with the chief inspector on arrival, provide your photo ID. It doesn't have to be like a driver's license, it just says photo ID. It's important to follow the chief inspector's instructions. They're the ones who are in charge of a polling site, and they'll tell you where to go. You should be placed in a spot that's between 3 and 8 feet away from the check-in and registration tables. If they want you to wear a name tag, put on the name tag. And then make sure you're behaving appropriately. No talking, don't talk on your phone, and then don't take photos, and then make sure you're not electioneering while you're there.
What if the registration and the registration, or the tables to check in are in different rooms?
If they're in different rooms, then, so our observers, they actually split their time between monitoring the check-in process and the registration process. If they're in different rooms, I would just say, talk to the chief inspector and say, for instance, I want to spend some time observing the check-in process. Where would you like me to go? I also then want to observe the registration process, and then they'll tell you where you're able to be. Yeah. I know for some people it can be hard with the 3 to 8 feet distance, just for hearing and trying to understand what's going on. But do the best you can. It is a balance between your ability to observe the process, but then also kind of the voters' right to not be intimidated by your presence looming over them.
Because I know when I observed at the Wisconsin Dells, which is a unique circumstance, because you have 4 different counties in Wisconsin Dells,
Oh, right.
but only 3 of them have voters in. I think it's Juneau County doesn't have a voter in their section of Wisconsin Dells. It's just land.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that's something as an observer, you need to go in with what is your goal in observing? What parts of the process do you want to observe? And I'll go into more detail about through our program, what our goals are and what kind of information we're going to collect.
I forgot to ask you ahead of time if you prefer to take questions during but let's save questions to the end, and you go through your presentation once, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and we'll have plenty of time at the end to talk and answer questions too. And I'm happy to go back to slides and kind of work through that process. So now we know what observers are, why you want to observe, what the rules are, what are some of the things that you can observe. And so that's kind of what I've laid out on this slide here. You can observe the election day process at polling places. You can observe early voting or in-person absentee voting, the central count process. So some municipalities They process all absentee ballots in one central location, and so that's something that you can go and observe how they process those ballots. Prior to elections, there's a public test of voting equipment, and that again is available for the public to come and observe. Recounts, and then you can also observe voting in residential care facilities and nursing homes. So they bring in special voting deputies to help people who can't go to the polls to vote. Okay, so now, what is our program? How does it work? A little background around the program. It began in 2010. One of our local league members from Milwaukee County, she started the program. Her name is Carolyn Histor, and she began the program with just a small handful of volunteers, 15 people observing 18 polling places. Since then, the program has really grown to be a statewide program. It's nationally recognized. And she has been critical in training more and more volunteer observers, training us at the state office to be able to kind of take this program from her and then make it a statewide program. And since we have launched the program, we've seen some major changes in Wisconsin elections and election laws. Passage of the voter ID law, a reduction in the time for early absentee voting, changes to voter registration and how that works, implementation of electronic poll books called Badger Books here. The pilot for that was last April, and now more and more municipalities are starting to use Badger Books. And then other new polling place administration procedures. And so through this program, we're able to kind of see what the impact of these new changes are on voters and be able to communicate with election officials about them. Having grassroots observers document the implementation of these changes across the state has been invaluable. We gather really great information through the program. And the data that we're able to collect supports our advocacy efforts across the state. And again, this program is only possible because of all the volunteers that we have who go and observe polling places. I mean, I can't be at 300 polling places at once. It really takes a huge team of people to be able to pull this off. These are the goals of our program. Our program is a hybrid of election observation and election protection. So the way that I think of this is that election observation is kind of the long-term goal of the program. People go and they have their reporting form, they document what they see, we take that information back and then compile it into a report, which we're then able to use in our advocacy efforts. We're able to make comparisons year over year. We're able to dive into the data and make comparisons between different parts of the state, like rural areas versus urban areas, and see if there are kind of disparities between different groups. And then the election protection part, I think of as kind of like the immediate part on election day. That's thinking of like, what can we do this election to ensure no voters are disenfranchised? So we train our observers to be able to respectfully intervene to help voters and resolve issues. For example, if somebody is wrongfully turned away, we train observers to be able to speak up for that person and talk with the chief inspector and say, hey, what's going on here? My understanding is that it's supposed to be this way. Your poll workers are saying it's going this way. And we have found that our observers have led to people actually being able to vote on election day because of those challenges. In addition, if somebody is, kind of rightfully turned away, maybe they don't have their proper proof of residence document, our observers are able to follow the voters out of the polling place and then give them extra information to help them figure out, oh, well, these are the documents that you can choose from. How can we navigate something that will allow you to vote today? That's been really helpful. And then while we're on the goals of our program, I think it's really important to just stress that through this program, we're not out to get anybody. We're not trying to say, oh, we got you, the system's wrong. We just wanted to have unbiased observers there to really track what's actually going on so that we we can respond and make things better. These are the components that are involved in running our program. Partners are huge in making this this whole thing happen. They provide us with funding. They help us recruit volunteers. They help us identify polling sites that need attention. And then they also provide much needed expertise and even help writing reports. We've drafted joint reports in the past. One of the organizations that we work extremely close with is Wisconsin Election Protection. And they provide our observers access to their legal team of lawyers on election day. So if there's something that needs to be kind of escalated to the next level, if the observer can't resolve it with the chief inspector themselves and they need to bring somebody else in, they've got a number in their back pocket that they can call for more help. Let's see. Oh, and then also we work with election protection. So they get a bunch of calls on election day as well from voters. And if they need somebody on the ground to go and check things out, we're able to move our observers from the location that they're at to another location to see what's going on and make sure that the situation is resolved. Like I said, volunteers are huge. This program works because of the volunteers that we have. League volunteers help us, recruit people to serve on election day. Election observers are all volunteers. They're the ones on the ground collecting the data, which we compile. And then we also rely on volunteers after election day to help us enter the data that we get from observer reports into a spreadsheet, which then we can analyze and then create our report. Training. So our observers go through a really robust training program. It's not like super intimidating, but we do like them to have a really firm handle on the registration process, voter ID laws, what to expect, so they can go in and, if needed, kind of talk to chief inspectors to kind of resolve some of these issues. We conduct our training through an online webinar, and then make the recording available to observers. And then we also send a pretty robust packet to observers so that they have reference materials so they can look into on election day. One of my roles as the coordinator of the program is to make polling place assignments. And we make assignments based on a combination of factors. Where are our volunteers coming from? How far are they willing to travel? What are the priority sites that we've identified to fill in to make assignments? To make assignments. The priority sites include sites that we've seen that have past issues, sites with large student populations, sites serving minority communities, and sites flagged for us by partners as needing extra attention on election day. So this map here shows the polling sites that we've assigned our volunteers to for the last 3 cycles of the program. So for November 2016, they're the red little flags. April of 2018 are the blue ones, and then in yellow are from this latest election, November 2018. Not the most recent to us, but the last time we had observers on. So you can see that it really is a statewide program, although, there are some areas that we don't have coverage in. So what does it look like for us on election day? We want to be really available to the public and to observers to be able to call us. So we have somebody who is in the room with the Wisconsin Election Protection lawyers and somebody in our office, and we're constantly communicating with our observers to try and answer any questions that they might have, resolve issues, and then also just be responsive to the needs of voters. So I mentioned our reporting form that we have and we give to volunteers. This is going to be like a really insider look to what we ask observers to give us information about. I know a lot of times we get questions about what kind of information are your observers been going out to collect, and so this is an in-depth look at what that information is. So when we split it up into 4 categories, the first one is general organization and polling site setup. So we're looking at parking. Is there signage put out? Is the accessible voting equipment set up? Are people able to use it if it is set up? Do they have privacy? Are people showing up at the polling site needing to be redirected to another polling site? And what does that process look like? Like I mentioned, we have our observers to check out registration. We want to know, is the line really long? How are they processing people to make sure that people are moving through in a timely manner? Are there a lot of people showing up to the polls thinking that they're registered to vote, and it turns out they need to re-register? And you kind of think, like, what information can we gather about that? We also have the ability, so we try to have the form be essentially the same from each time we observe, so that we are able to do the comparison data, but we also want it to be flexible to be able to respond to specific needs for elections. So one of the questions that you'll see, or that you see here, is if somebody was claimed that they were registered, not found in the rolls, and needed to re-register, was the supplemental list checked? So that's in reference to the need for the supplemental ERIC poll list. And so we trained our observers on what the list was, what it should look like, and when it should be checked. So we were able to collect data on whether or not, in practice, were poll workers checking the list like the Elections Commission was hoping that they would do. We also have, through our previous iterations of the program, have found out that not every polling place accepts electronic proof of residence. They're all supposed to. And we want to know how widespread the problem is of places not accepting electronic proof of residence. So that was also a new question that we added right here as well, to gather data about that. We want our observers to know, is anyone turned away from registration? Why are they turned away? These are the most common reasons that people are turned away at registration, and we want to know which is the biggest barrier for voters so that we can target our efforts around that. Page 3 looks at the voting process and photo ID. If we have to have photo ID laws, we want to make sure that they're applied to everybody uniformly. So that's why some of these questions are on here. Another one is about whether or not poll workers are asking about voters' addresses on their photo IDs. Once you're registered, your address on your photo ID does not matter. It doesn't have to match. And so that's something that we want to gather information about. Similar to registration, we want to know if people are turned away because they don't have an ID, what is done to make sure that they know about provisional ballots when they should be offered one, and to kind of gather any details we can about that process. And then finally, we ask our observers impressions of the overall, staff at the polling site. Are they knowledgeable? Are people following the rules? And to give us any additional comments that they have about the site. And we get a lot of really good information from the comments of things we don't even think to ask about. And that information we then can incorporate in future programs to adapt it to try and find that information as well. Okay, and then so once we get all of these reporting forms back, in November, we got 388 reporting forms back. We've got to compile that into a spreadsheet so that we can analyze the data and then put together this, single readable report that summarizes what does election look like across Wisconsin. So that's one of the things that I work on. We publish the full report and an executive summary of the report on our website. It's available for anyone to see and download. We also share it with the media and try and get publicity around it so that people know, hey, we're out here doing this. You can come get this information too. We also share it with partners and they use it in their advocacy efforts as well. I think one of the most important parts of our program is the follow-up that we do with election officials. I mean, it's one thing for us to get this information and kind of think it through, like, how are we gonna use it for our own outreach efforts, advocacy, but I think it's so helpful to have, be able to give this information to election officials and be open to having conversations with them about, okay, now that we know all these things are happening, you know that we know that you know, what can we do to make things better? Okay, and then now I'm gonna go over some highlights from our reports. Overall, we found that Wisconsinites should be really happy with the way that elections are run in Wisconsin. Most poll workers are overwhelmingly very knowledgeable, very willing to help voters. Things are well organized, and we have, great voter turnout and, strong election administration here. I think that comes as no surprise with having over 1,800 municipalities running elections, that training is the biggest issue that we see. And from training comes all these other issues of like, do you know what acceptable proof of residence are? Do you know that people's addresses don't need to be current on their photo ID? Do you know that if a voter comes in and wants to use the accessible voting equipment, do you know how to help them use it? So these are so training is really, really a very, very key component. And I know at the previous breakout, the elections commission mentioned that they have 1/3 turnover in municipal clerks every year. And so ongoing training is so important because there's so many people who this is their first election. And so they're just trying to maybe get through it. But it's important to have people who are up to speed about all the rules. So through our program, we're not trying to only find, the issues and the problems that are going on election day. We also want to know what the good things are that are happening that could be replicated in other polling sites as well. So these are just a couple highlights of best practices that we've been able to identify through the program. One of the things is, poll workers going above and beyond to help voters. They should be kind of telling them what the acceptable proof of residence documents are. But if they actually take the time to go through them all and ask a voter, oh, do you have this? Or do you have this? What about this other thing? We have seen, our observers have witnessed that people who thought that maybe they couldn't vote are actually able to vote on election day. And that is really key. Another thing is greeters. They are the person at the polling place where, when you come in, they're there to help you navigate where you need to go. Are you at the right polling place? If you're not, they can help redirect voters to the correct polling place. Do you need to register? Oh, you go to this line. Do you need to check in? Oh, go to this line, and kind of sort through some of those things. That really keeps people from getting in this long check-in line, only to realize when they go to sign the poll book, oh, I'm not registered, and to go in the other line and have to wait all over again. So it really can keep things smooth on election day. One really great best practice that we have seen through the program is when poll workers ask voters if they'd like to use the machine or paper ballot. This makes it so that it's not only the person with a disability who's coming in and using the accessible voting equipment. Everyone should be able to use it, and everybody can use it. It also ensures that poll workers know that people are going to use it, so it's set up and ready to go for people who use it. And it also makes it kind of less intimidating for other people. And then it doesn't point out people who may have a disability, oh, you really need to use the accessible voting equipment. It's up to the voter to decide what they want to do. Signage is very important at polling sites, especially on heavy turnout elections. Sometimes you can show up and it's chaos, you don't know which line to come into. And so one of the things that we've seen is overhead signs are really helpful so that even when there is a lot of people there, they know exactly where to go and to navigate. We've also seen signs at polling sites that say, when you go to check in, it says, state your name, show your ID, and sign the book. So things like that kind of spell out the process, allows voters to know, oh, this is what I should expect from this interaction, and also knows if there's a deviation from that process to be like, well, I thought I was supposed to do this thing, but you're not asking me to, or, well, that's not on the list that you're saying. So it makes it more consistent voter to voter. Having curbside voting instructions outside the polling place is another really good practice. So polling places are required to offer curbside assistance to voters, but oftentimes there's no indication of what the voter's supposed to do if they show up to get assistance. And if they can't go inside the polling site, what are they supposed to do? So there is signage out there saying, if you want curbside assistance, honk your horn, call this number, then they're actually able to access that service, and they know that it's there and available to them as well. And then I can't say this enough. This isn't really a choice of poll workers, but same-day registration is like the best practice we have for elections. I mean, we've seen through the program so many people use it, whether they show up to vote thinking that they're registered, realize that they need to re-register, and go register and vote. With this, I don't know if everyone's familiar with what happened with the air maintenance process, where people last February were removed from the rolls in error, showed up to vote, found out that they weren't registered, and it was no fault of their own. Same-day registration allowed those people to be able to still register and vote on election day. And it's also great for young voters and first-time voters who are like, oh, today's election day? And they can go and still cast their ballot and make their vote count. Okay, so now I'm going to review some of the biggest issues that we've been able to identify through the program. A key part of the program is that because we know that these things occur and we have data to back them up, we can follow up on them with some sort of action to try and correct them. So for registration, the most common reason voters are turned away from the polls is because they don't have the proper proof of residence documents. For example, one student in Winnebago County, during the April 2018 election, showed up to vote but was unable to produce a proof of residence document because they're a student, they rent with several other people, all the bills that they have are in other people's names, they don't have a driver's license, and they were unable to access the internet to show their enrollment verification. That person tried to vote, resides in Wisconsin, but was unable to vote because of their circumstances. We also know that there's confusion about what acceptable proof of residence is among voters and poll workers. Again, in the April 2018 election, we saw voters trying to use credit cards, out-of-state driver's license, work IDs, things that would maybe count as photo. Well, like maybe people would think it as photo ID, even though those aren't on the list for that either. But people are like, oh, I know I need to bring something, and they bring documents that they think might fit the bill. One example of a voter who tried to vote needing to register, thought he had enough. He brought a work ID with no address, a driver's license that displayed an old address, and then, that doesn't work to establish where you live in Wisconsin. Fortunately, in that situation, the poll worker was able to walk through documents with this voter, and they left to go get a utility bill and come back and vote. And then another issue that we've seen, and I talked a little bit about this before, but is that not every single site allows voters to show their electronic proof of residency. Voters are allowed to use that as proof of residency, but there are times where poll workers either don't know or don't trust technology, and so they decide against the law to not allow it. For example, in the November election, we saw 14 sites that didn't allow voters to use electronic proof of residency. One of the sites, the observer overheard poll workers saying like, we just don't trust technology, kind of chatting about it, and then the voter was told to go back home and get proper proof of residency. So. The biggest issues around voter ID The single biggest misapplication of the voter ID law is that poll workers and voters think that your address needs to be current on your photo ID in order to vote. It's a big misconception, misunderstanding. At best, it's a misunderstanding that the chief inspector can then go and correct the issue and make sure that the poll workers know not to be checking addresses on photo IDs. At worst, it's voter intimidation, or potentially, we haven't seen this, but potentially people can be turned away for that. In the last November election, several poll workers in Kenosha were checking addresses on photo IDs improperly. The first time they saw a discrepancy, they called over the chief inspector to figure out what was going on. And the chief inspector said, no, the address doesn't need to match. This person is fine to vote. But some of the poll workers disapproved of the policy, and our observer got the sense of that. And then they continued to ask voters about their address and their IDs. They didn't withhold ballots from anybody, but voters were made to feel really uncomfortable about their ability to vote using their ID, and that is tantamount to voter intimidation. Similar to proof of residence, there's still a lot of confusion about what is an acceptable photo ID among poll workers and voters. As recent as, again, the November election, observers reported voters trying to use credit cards, out-of-state driver's license, non-compliant student ID cards, and there are even still voters showing up to the polls not even aware that there's a photo ID requirement, attempting to vote, arguing with poll workers, and then they should be offered a provisional ballot, but I'll get into that in a second here. And then finally, there's still voters out there who don't have an ID. There are pathways for them to get an ID, but on election day there are limited options. They still should be offered a provisional ballot, but some people just don't have an ID, and because of their circumstances, it's very challenging for them to get one. So I said I'd talk about provisional ballots. They are offered very inconsistently from polling place to polling place. Some places over-offer them. So the situation where you should be offered a provisional ballot is if you are registered to vote but don't have a photo ID to vote. That's the most common one. There are a couple other situations where they're a lot less common. But this is the situation where you should be offered a provisional ballot. You shouldn't be offered a provisional ballot if you have not registered and don't have proof of residence. That's not a case where you can get a provisional ballot. And we've seen sites that offer provisional ballots to voters who are unable to register. So that's the instances of over-offering. Way more commonly is voters being under-offered provisional ballots. A lot of times when voters don't have an ID, they're told to go home and get something, or if they don't ask, they don't offer them. We've seen situations where poll workers are uncomfortable with the rules around how to offer them, and so sometimes that's why it happens. In the November election in Milwaukee County, one of our observers saw two chief inspectors at one site arguing about what's the procedure to give a voter a provisional ballot, and if the people who are running the site can't even agree on the procedures, how is the voter gonna get one? There are also cases where poll workers blatantly will not offer a provisional ballot to a voter, and I really think that this is a big issue that needs some attention. In the November election, 40% of the people that our observers witnessed that should have been offered a provisional ballot were not offered one. And I honestly think that percentage is lower than it actually is in real life, because I think a lot of our observers, if somebody says, oh, well, I've got my ID at home, I'll go and get it, that person should still be offered a provisional ballot.
Right.
It should be up to them to decide whether or not they want to whether or not they want to vote provisionally, or if they want to go home. A few other issues that I want to highlight are around accessibility. We found through the program that the accessible voting equipment is not universally set up at all polling sites. That is a requirement that it should be, but it's just not the case that they're set up everywhere. And even with some places where they are set up, sometimes it's not set up correctly. The ink cartridge might be dry, so they're not able to actually use it when the time comes that somebody wants to use it, or sometimes they're in a location that is just not private. And I think that we all have the right to privately cast our ballot. Also during high turnout elections, the sheer number of people in a polling site can be a challenge for accessibility. When there's long lines, having to stand in line if you are not able to stand for long periods of time, that can be a real barrier. Or even if there's just so many people, it can be challenging for you to get to the area of the polling site that you need to get to. So that can be challenging. And then if poll workers are overwhelmed by the volume of people, then sometimes they end up neglecting people with disabilities. We had one situation in the November election where a voter was denied curbside voting. Everyone has the right to curbside vote if they have a disability, and they were told, we don't have any way to help you right now, so they weren't able to vote. Let's see. Oh, and then again, this goes back to the training. Lack of training can lead to people being denied their rights on election day. So one situation that comes to mind for me is a voter who came with their guardian. They are legally able to vote, but when their guardian went to assist them, as they're allowed to do, the poll worker denied the voter the ability to have that assistance. Everybody has the right to have assistance to fill out their ballot. It just cannot be your employer, union rep, or a candidate. So that voter was denied the help that they needed. Now I'm going to go into some of the year over year and then different site comparisons. This chart here has comparison between the November 2016 election and then some things that we saw in November 2018 election. You'll notice that there's not really a lot of difference in there. And so to me that says things didn't change. What's good is like the low percentage of some of the occurrence of these things. So for example, accessible voting equipment not being set up, is under 10% of polling sites, that we have observed. But that also means that nearly 10% of sites don't have the accessible voting equipment set up. And we know what sites we have seen this happen at. So there can be targeted outreach to those sites to make sure that it happens. Size of sites, similar thing, staffing. Again, if you see the highest bar here is under poll workers asking voters about their address on IDs. Again, it actually went up a little bit for the percentage of sites. It's not a statistically significant difference, so the levels, I guess, are considered the same. But honestly, that number should be going down. And then, again, the number of voters not being told about provision of ballots is very similar. And then for that one too, we expect that number to be small, and this isn't the number of voters that are not offered provisional ballots. This is the number of sites that we have seen, we have witnessed this at not offering provisional ballots to voters. And that it's a unique case, and so we don't expect to see a lot of it, but that's the information there. And then these are some graphs about comparison between the difference between rural and urban sites that we've seen. The top one is for the April 2018 election. The bottom one is from the November 2018 election. As you can see, rural sites are way more likely to lack signage, proper signage at the site. I think a common thought process with that is like, well, we're, you know, close, tight-knit community. Everybody knows where to go vote. Maybe we don't need a signage. But I mean, the thing is, like, people move into your area, or, you know, there are new high school, or, you know, new young voters who are going to vote, and they might not know exactly where to go. So signage is very important. Similarly, in the April 2018 election, we noticed that it was way more common for rural sites to not have accessible voting equipment set up, and then again, when it was set up, to not have it in a place that was private. We also saw that in the 2018 election, that sites with voters showing up to vote, claiming to be registered and then needing to re-register, that was a lot more common in urban polling sites. Maybe have more transient population, so people moving, maybe not realizing that they need to re-register when they move, you know, and different things like that. And then the lack of signage being more common at rural sites carried through from April to November. Voters need to be redirected was much larger at urban sites when compared to rural sites. Staffing and then long lines at urban sites were a lot more common.
We've got 5 minutes until our scheduled stopping time, but we started late, so if we could move questions sometime soon, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Well, I'm almost done. Actually, I've got like 2 more slides, so.
Okay.
So here again, we did comparison between sites that have large student populations to sites that don't serve students in the April election and the November election. Take a look at the information. Students, sites that have students had more people, were more likely to have people who had difficulty producing an ID, were more likely to not be offered provisional ballots, were more likely to be asked about the address on their ID. And then, and then in this November election, they were more likely to have really long lines. But if you imagine like a student site where people live on campus, they come down, it was very easy for them to go to the polling site. Okay, so looking at this information that we have, you know, what do we do with it? We use it to inform our advocacy. Like I mentioned, you know, specifically it's been used in our voter ID testimony. We welcome and have done collaborations with clerks to, you know, talk with them about the information that we found, talk about some recommendations to find solutions to make elections better for voters. You know, it informs our advocacy. We use it, we share it with partners to help inform their advocacy. One example that comes to mind too is our work with the Wisconsin Disability Vote Coalition, especially our information about access at polling sites. We definitely share with them. And then we also get increased public awareness of these issues through media. So Q&A.
Okay,
We're here.
I want to start with just a few comments to add a few things to she said. One of the things I'm an experienced observer, and I know that if you see something wrong or out of place, the first instruction is talk to the chief inspector, talk to the municipal clerk. You know, you don't just go running off reporting it, you know, or calling a lawyer if you see something. And more often than not, the chief inspector and the municipal clerk are thankful for you being there and like, oh my gosh, I didn't turn on the accessible voting machine. Oh, you know, I didn't know my poll workers were doing that, you know, and the observation program really does supplement, I think, the training program of the municipal clerks. They have so much turnover, and for the most part, they really appreciate it, and it's a cooperative thing with the municipal clerks and the chief observers. The other thing I wanted to mention is, back you had a slide of different opportunities for observation. Now the League's really organized program that has to do with election day observing, but there's also the observation of the testing of the voting equipment, and something that's new and growing, if you were in the last session, observation of post-election audits. And now again, that's because the clerks aren't used to having any public present, I mean, including voters. I mean, with election day, at least there's voters there that say, I'm supposed to be able to do that. With pre-election voting machine tests, usually you walk in and you're the first person who has ever observed it. And the first year we did organized observation of the pre-election voting machine test through the Wisconsin Election Integrity, 50%, half of the municipal clerks failed to check that the machine was counting votes correctly, which is the statutory purpose of those tests. And they were just checking to see if it counted ballots correctly, or if it had the clock set right, you know, all these things. And again, it was just this massive education it turned into effort, you know, because when you said, wait, you're not done, you didn't check to see if it counted votes right. There's, am I supposed to do that? And you, yeah, you see, you're supposed to. Oh, okay, wait, well, that makes sense, you know. Anyways.
Gee, I plugged it in, the light turned on.
Yeah, I tested it, yeah. So again, I just wanted to stress that value of these tests, and again, just to reiterate, the legislators really do listen to the League of Women Voters. All the other work we do for election integrity, we just don't, other groups just don't have the credibility and the gravitas of League of Women Voters, but when they show up with their report from election observation, they get listened to. So, okay, now questions.
Can anyone be an observer?
Yes, so anyone can be an observer, and I should have said this sooner.
I mean, even like a high school student?
Yeah.
Because I'm wondering, and I'm just passing this on as information, wouldn't it be great if we had the high schools, social studies, classes set up where they could go down and observe? It would get the young kids involved. It would teach them where to go vote, what the voting process is like. You know, and even if their parents are with them, you know, it's a learning. Voting and democracy is not a spectator sport.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point and a really great idea. I know that you know, high schoolers can actually serve as poll workers as well, and so there are some programs looking at how to engage high school students in the process in some way. Yeah, and I should have said this sooner, but so through our program, you don't have to be a league member to be one of our volunteer observers. Anyone is able to do it, and so we welcome everybody to participate in our program.
How often is the training?
How often is the training? So we do the training leading up to every time that we observe. We typically observe in the April elections and November elections. We're not doing one this April, so kind of years where there's going to be like a November general election, we'll typically do April as well. So 2020 will be the next time that we observe.
Oh.
And equipment checks are so important. We had to have a recount in Stoughton
Oh,
because the equipment check wasn't done properly.
we had a volunteer who said she was gonna go to Stoughton to observe, she didn't do it, and darned if it turned out that the machines were misprogrammed and completely miscounted the election.
Yeah, they counted like, what, 7 or 9 votes out of 6,000.